That was when he heard it, a sound that did not belong to the wind. Thin, frail, yet desperate, threading through the trees like a cracked reed pipe. A cry. He drew rein sharply, head cocked, listening. The horse snorted, stamping, uneasy. Another cry came, higher, sharper. Not an animal. Not the keening of coyotes. A child. He nudged the horse forward, guiding it off the main track and into the timber where the shadows already lay deep. Through the branches, he spotted a shape slumped against a broken wagon. The thing leaned at an angle, half collapsed where one wheel had splintered, its canvas torn, dusted with frost. Snow clung to the ruts around it, where no fresh prints marked the ground. The wagon looked abandoned. But the cries rose from within, ragged, frightened. He dismounted, boots sinking into the half-frozen earth. The smell of rot clung to the wagon wood, mingled with a metallic tang of blood. He pulled back the flap of canvas and froze. 2 children crouched there, wide-eyed and trembling. Twins, from the look, 7, maybe 8 years old, thin as kindling. A boy and girl. Dark hair hung lank around their pale faces, eyes black as wet stone. The boy clutched a stick in shaking hands, holding it like a weapon though his wrists were too thin to wield it. The girl pressed against him, lips cracked, breath shallow. Between them, stretched on a pallet of rags, lay a woman. Her face was ashen, sweat beading along her hairline, her breath shallow and irregular. Her dress clung damp to her body, torn at the shoulder where a wound, angry and red, festered. The boy lifted his stick, voice breaking with both defiance and fear. "Are you going to kill our mama? She's dying." The words struck Dale like a stone. His heart gave a hard thud. In that moment, he saw more than a pair of frightened children. He saw all the cruelty that had driven them here, the weight of abandonment, the raw terror of losing the only anchor they had left. He raised his hands slowly, palms outward, showing he carried no harm. "No," he said softly, voice steady as river rock. "No, son. I aim to keep her breathing." The boy's stick wavered, then lowered, though suspicion stayed etched in his small face. The girl's eyes brimmed, though no tears fell. Perhaps she had none left. Dale crouched, pressing fingers lightly to the woman's throat. Weak, thready pulse. Heat radiated off her skin, fever running high. Infection had taken hold, and fast. His mind ticked over. If he left them here, the cold alone would claim them before dawn. If he tried to fetch a doctor from town, he might return to 3 still bodies. That left only one choice. "We're leaving this place," he said. The twins clung tighter to each other, uncertain. He eased his arms under the woman, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than he expected, her frame wasted by sickness, yet her dead weight strained his back. She moaned faintly, head lolling against his chest. He carried her to his horse, whispering steady words to keep the animal calm. Then he turned back, kneeling before the children. "Up you go, both of you." The boy shook his head, fear still tightening his jaw. She'll die if you move her." "She'll die if we don't," Dale said simply. His voice carried the unflinching certainty of a man who had lived through winters, storms, and worse. The boy's gaze searched his, as though testing the truth of those words. Whatever he saw there was enough. He gave a short nod and climbed up, pulling his sister with him. Dale mounted last, settling their mother across the saddle before him, her head tucked against his chest. He felt the heat of her fever through his coat, each shallow breath a fragile thing. The children clung to his sides, small hands gripping his duster as though their lives depended on the strength of his horse's stride. The ride back to the ranch was a battle against the dying light. Wind rose in sharp gusts, throwing needles of snow against his face. Branches creaked overhead. The horse labored through drifts gathering in hollows, hooves muffled. Dale's jaw tightened as he urged it faster. The girl's teeth chattered. The boy buried his face against Dale's arm, but they made no sound. Only the storm spoke. By the time they reached his land, night had nearly swallowed the sky. The cabin stood against the rise, smoke curling from its chimney, shutters rattling under the wind. To the twins it must have looked like a lone lantern in the wilderness, fragile yet steady. He swung down, lifting their mother with a grunt, then helped the children dismount. Their small hands clung to him still as he guided them inside. The warmth struck them first. The fire burned low in the hearth, filling the room with the smell of pitch and smoke. Shadows danced across rough-hewn beams, across shelves of jars and tools, across the simple table scarred by years of use. It was no grand home, but it was shelter. Dale laid the woman on his bed, covering her with blankets. He fetched water from the kettle, dampening a cloth to lay across her burning brow. The wound on her shoulder was foul, inflamed with streaks running outward. He would need to clean it, draw out the poison. His hands, steady from years of ranch work, did not falter. Yet his eyes lingered on her face. So young, younger than himself, though suffering had aged her. The children hovered by the hearth, silent, watchful. Their eyes followed every move he made, as though waiting for betrayal. He kept his voice low, steady, speaking more to the fire than to them. "She's strong. She's fighting. We'll give her a chance." He heated water, dropped herbs into it, sage and willow bark, what he had on hand. He tore clean cloth into strips. His breath came slow, steady. When he cleaned the wound, the woman moaned, her hand twitching. The boy flinched, half rising, but Dale shook his head. "I'm helping her. Hold steady." It took long minutes, each one stretched taut by the children's stares. At last, he bound the wound, laid her back, and let her rest. Her chest rose and fell, still shallow but steadier now. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow though the room was cold. He crossed to the hearth, ladling broth from the pot that simmered there. He set 2 bowls on the table, sliding them toward the children. "Eat. Warm yourselves." They hesitated, glancing at each other. Hunger finally broke through fear. The girl edged forward first, cradling the bowl as if it might vanish. The boy followed, spoon trembling in his small hand. They ate quietly, glancing at him between mouthfuls. Dale sat across from them, his face unreadable in the shifting firelight. His coat hung heavy on the chair, his shirt damp from snow. He looked like a man carved from stone, gray eyes, weathered hands, jaw shadowed with stubble. Yet when he glanced at the children, there was no hardness in it. Only a watchfulness, a measuring. The twins finished their meal, exhaustion pulling at their eyelids. They curled together near the fire, too wary still to climb into a stranger's bed. Dale let them be. He fetched another log, laid it on the fire, and settled into a chair near the woman's bedside. His body ached from the ride, from the weight of carrying her, yet he did not let himself rest. He kept his gaze on her breathing, each rise and fall a fragile tether holding her to this world. Hours stretched thin. Outside, the wind screamed around the eaves, snow hissing against the shutters. Inside, the fire crackled, the children murmured in restless sleep, and Dale sat steady, a sentinel in the storm. He thought of his own losses, buried years ago, names he did not speak aloud, and wondered at the strange turn of fate that had laid this burden in his arms. He did not question it long. The frontier offered no time for such things. A soul appeared on your path, and you chose whether to bear it or turn away. He had chosen. Near midnight, the woman stirred. Her eyes flickered open, dark and fever-bright. She looked around, confusion clouding her face, until her gaze fell on her children. They slept safe, curled by the hearth. Relief softened her features, though pain shadowed it still. Her gaze shifted to Dale, who sat silent at her side. Her lips parted, voice raw. Why help us?" He held her gaze, steady as stone, though something unspoken flickered behind his eyes. "Because you're here. Because you needed it." Her lashes trembled. She whispered something in a tongue he did not know, soft, prayer-like. Then her eyes closed again, sinking back into exhausted sleep. Dale sat back, exhaling slow. The children stirred, the boy half waking to glance toward the bed. "Is Mama?" "She's alive," Dale said. "Rest now." The boy nodded, curling tighter against his sister. The fire sank lower, shadows thickening. Dale leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, gaze still fixed on the frail rise and fall of the woman's chest. Outside, the storm deepened. The cabin shuddered under its force. But inside, fragile warmth held. For now, death had been kept at bay. Yet Dale knew the night was long, and the road ahead longer still. He sat in the dark, listening to the wind, watching over the wounded stranger and her children. And in the hollow of that storm, a thought, unbidden, pressed itself against his mind. This was not chance. This was the beginning of something that would change all their lives. Dale Holt moved through the cabin with quiet steps, as though sound itself might fracture the fragile peace inside. The children still slept, curled together on the bearskin rug near the hearth, their breaths shallow but steady. Their mother lay pale in his bed, her face softer in rest than it had been in fever, though shadows still bruised her cheeks. He had slept hardly at all, drifting in and out of a chair at her side, eyes waking at each shift of her breathing. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, yet his body remained steady, built for endurance. He had carried heavier burdens than this, but not in years. He ladled broth into a tin cup, steam curling upward, filling the cabin with a scent of sage and bone. When the girl stirred, blinking her black eyes open, he crouched beside her and held it out. She hesitated, then sat up, her braids tangled, lips cracked with dryness. Her small fingers closed around the cup, fragile as a bird's. She sipped, gaze flicking from him to her brother, then to the bed where her mother slept. Dale gave the boy a cup as well, not speaking. Silence carried more weight than words in this house, and he sensed the children needed quiet more than they needed questions. The girl whispered finally, voice hoarse, "She's still alive?" He nodded once. Alive. The boy swallowed hard, the broth trembling in his hands. He seemed on the edge of speech, but his throat closed, leaving him mute. Dale let him be. He had seen enough frightened children in his life to know that words only came when they were ready. The woman woke later, weak but conscious. Her eyes found her children first, a flicker of relief crossing her face. Then her gaze found him, and there was wariness in it, sharp and assessing, as though she measured whether this man who had brought them here might yet prove another threat. She tried to rise, but her body betrayed her, trembling under the weight of her fever. Dale's hand was there, firm against her shoulder, pressing her gently back against the pillow. "Rest," he said, voice low, unyielding. "You're not ready." She studied him, breath shallow, as though searching for cruelty in the corners of his face. Finding none, she let her head sink back. The twins climbed onto the bed beside her, their small bodies tucking against her sides, and for a long moment, nothing moved in the cabin but the fire. The day passed in slow rhythm. Dale chopped wood in the shed, the thock of his axe steady against the howl of wind. The children watched him through the window, their dark eyes reflecting each strike. When he returned, arms laden with split logs, the boy edged closer, tentative. "Can I help?" His voice wavered, but there was steel beneath it. Dale studied him for a beat, then set down a smaller log and handed the axe over. The boy's arms trembled under its weight, but Dale knelt behind him, guiding his grip, steadying his stance. Together they swung, the blade biting shallow into the grain. It was not strength that mattered, but the learning of it, the rhythm of work, the dignity of trying. When the log split at last, the boy's eyes lit with something brighter than fear. Dale clapped a hand lightly to his shoulder. No words, but approval enough. Inside, the girl had taken needle and thread to a tear in her mother's skirt, her small fingers clumsy but persistent. Dale brought in mended shoes from the trunk, a pair his sister had once worn, long ago, before the fever took her, and set them by the girl's side. She touched them reverently, eyes darting up at him, but said nothing. Some gestures were too large for words. Evening settled in with a hush, snow blanketing the world in silence. Dale cooked beans and salt pork, the smell filling the cabin. The children ate quietly, their eyes heavy with exhaustion but their bellies warmed. Their mother took only a few mouthfuls before sleep claimed her again. When the twins curled against each other by the fire, Dale tucked a quilt around them. He lingered a moment, looking down at their faces, how the fear seemed to ease when they slept. He felt something stir in him, something long buried under years of solitude. He turned away before it could take root. Night deepened. He sat once more by the woman's side, watching her chest rise and fall. Outside, the storm clawed at the walls, as though determined to tear them apart. He had faced storms before, knew their violence, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, he was not only guarding himself against it, but 3 fragile lives who had come to rest in his keeping. The responsibility pressed against him, heavy but strangely right, as though he had been waiting for it without knowing. On the second morning, the fever broke. She opened her eyes clearer than before, color faintly returning to her cheeks. Her gaze found Dale, and this time there was no accusation in it, only weary gratitude. "You saved us," she murmured, her voice unsteady. "I did what needed doing," he said, pouring water into a tin cup and helping her sip. His touch was steady, practical, nothing more, but she felt the weight of it as though it anchored her back to life. She slept again, and when she woke later, she tried to sit up. Dale offered his arm, supporting her without comment. The children clung to her hands, faces pressed close. She whispered words to them in her own tongue, soft syllables that filled the room like a prayer. Dale listened without understanding, yet the tone spoke clearly: reassurance, love, promises. Days settled into rhythm. The storm eased, though snow still lay deep around the cabin. Dale showed the children how to stack wood neatly, how to feed the hens in the shed, how to carry buckets from the well. They followed him with cautious steps, their trust slow but growing, like sap rising under bark. The boy asked more questions, about the horse, about the rifle on the wall, about how far the land stretched beyond the ridge. Dale answered sparingly, yet with patience. The girl watched more than she spoke, her eyes always drawn to her mother, as though afraid she might vanish if she looked away too long. One afternoon the woman, her voice still faint, asked Dale for a needle and cloth. She mended her children's clothes, though her stitches trembled with weakness. He watched her hands, saw the stubbornness in them. When he offered to finish the work, she shook her head, determination flashing. She would not surrender her role as mother, not even to gratitude. Dale respected that. He left her the needle, saying nothing. As the days passed, she began to move more, gathering her strength. Sometimes she would stand by the door, wrapped in a shawl, watching the horizon with wary eyes. He wondered what memories pressed behind that gaze, what ghosts lingered in the distance. He did not ask. He knew enough of grief to let silence hold its place until words were ready. The children, though, began to laugh. At first softly, uncertain, as though testing whether laughter was allowed. Then freer, brighter, spilling from them in bursts when Dale lifted them onto the horse and walked it in slow circles by the barn. He stood tall and steady beside them, his hand on the bridle, while they clutched the saddle horn and shrieked with giddy fear. Their mother watched from the doorway, tears glistening unshed in her eyes. For the first time, her children were not simply surviving, they were living. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, she sat by the fire, blanket around her shoulders. Dale sat across from her, the firelight etching the lines of his face. She studied him quietly for a long while before speaking. "Why did you not leave us in the snow?" He met her gaze, steady. "A man don't leave the helpless to die. Not if he can help it." Her lips trembled, though she pressed them tight. "Many would have." "I'm not many," he said. The fire crackled between them. She looked away at last, her eyes falling to her children, sleeping safe under the quilt. "You gave them more than food. You gave them rest." Dale said nothing, though something in his chest shifted at her words. He turned his gaze to the flames, letting silence fall again. The nights grew colder. One such night, Dale woke to the sound of wind howling harder than before. He rose, checked the shutters, fed the fire. When he turned back, he found the boy standing barefoot near the bed, clutching a blanket. "I dreamed they came back," he whispered. "The men who hurt Mama." Dale knelt, his hand resting heavy and sure on the boy's shoulder. "Dreams can't hurt you here. Not while I'm standing." The boy searched his face, and for the first time, belief settled in his eyes. He nodded slowly, then climbed back under the quilt with his sister. Dale stood a long moment, watching them breathe, before returning to his chair. The woman's eyes were half open, watching him through the dim light. She said nothing, but her gaze held gratitude deeper than words. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a fragile sanctuary had taken root. It was not trust yet, not entirely. But it was the beginning of something stronger. And as Dale looked once more at the door, snow seeping under its frame, he felt the weight of a truth pressing in. Storms were not the only things that threatened from beyond those walls. Dale rose before light, as always, his movements quiet so as not to wake the children. He stepped out to split wood, the axe's rhythm steady against the crisp air, and with each strike he felt the world shift slightly around him, as if the land itself had grown watchful since the night he carried that family home. When he returned, the boy had already risen, struggling with the boots too big for him, carrying kindling in his small arms. Dale said nothing, only took the bundle and gave a short nod, and the boy straightened under the weight of that silent approval. The woman was stronger now, though the wound still pulled at her shoulder when she moved. She sat by the fire mending clothes or brushing the girl's hair into neat braids. At times, she sang softly under her breath, words Dale did not know but which carried the lilt of lullabies meant to soothe. The children leaned close when she sang, their eyes softening. Dale, though he pretended to busy himself with tools or feed sacks, listened too, feeling the notes fill spaces in the cabin long left hollow. It was during one such evening, when the fire burned low and the twins dozed against each other, that she spoke more fully for the first time. Her voice was faint, and the words halting, but steady with truth. We were on the railroad line. My husband worked too many hours. Always tired, always coughing. He fell from the trestle last spring. They said accident. I knew better. He had been weak for months, but they never let him rest. Her gaze drifted to the fire, eyes reflecting its glow. When he died, they said the debt was still mine. For food, for the tent, for the tools he used. They told me to work in the camp, cooking, washing. I had no choice. Her fingers twisted in her lap, the firelight catching scars on her knuckles. I lasted some months. Then the foreman came. Calder Briggs. He wanted things I would not give. Dale sat very still, his jaw tightening at the name. Briggs was a man he knew by reputation, hard-fisted, sharp-eyed, with a taste for cruelty. Dale had seen him once in town, heard the way he spoke about Chinese workers as though they were animals. He said nothing now, letting her continue. I told him no. He beat me. Then he said the debt would never end, that my children belonged to the company same as I did. I waited until night. I took what food I could, put the children on the wagon, and we left. Her voice faltered, but she forced it steady again. They followed. One struck me down. We barely escaped. The wagon broke in the woods. If you had not found us. Her words trailed off, unfinished, but the silence spoke. Dale's hands curled against his knees. He had no wife, no children of his own, but something in her story burned in him like coal. He had seen the way men like Briggs twisted the law, cloaked cruelty in talk of debts and contracts. On this land, survival often meant turning away, pretending you had not heard. But Dale had never been one to turn his face from injustice when it stood breathing in front of him. She looked at him then, her dark eyes shining with both fear and defiance. You should send us away. They will come. Men like him do not forget. His voice came slow, measured, as though carved from the same timber as his house. Snow's too deep. You'd not last a day. You'll stay. Until you're strong enough to walk where you choose. Her lips parted, but no words came. The fire cracked, filling the silence. She bowed her head at last, not in surrender, but in exhausted recognition of truth. The next morning, Dale rode into town for supplies. The children watched him go, their eyes anxious until he promised he would return by nightfall. Snow muffled the world, his horse's hooves crunching steady. The town lay gray and brittle under winter's hand, smoke rising from chimneys, windows frosted. He entered the mercantile, bought flour, coffee, lamp oil. It was there he heard the first whispers. Two men stood near the counter, voices pitched low, but Dale caught the words like burrs clinging to wool. Run off, took her brats with her. Briggs is paying good money to get her back. The other spat into the sawdust on the floor. Fool woman shoulda stayed where she belonged. Chinese don't last out here nohow. Dale set his goods on the counter harder than necessary. Both men glanced at him, fell quiet. His gray eyes met theirs, cold as river ice, and neither dared continue. But he heard enough. Briggs was hunting. And word traveled faster than snowmelt in spring. On his ride back, he watched the ridges, the line of the trees. He saw hoofprints where none should have been, cutting across the frozen creek bed. Men were scouting already. His hand rested on the rifle strapped to his saddle, though he did not slow. That night, he said nothing to the woman, not wanting fear to hollow her more than it already had. But he set his rifle by the door, checked the shutters twice, and stoked the fire high. The twins noticed. The boy asked quietly, "They're coming, aren't they?" Dale's silence was answer enough. He crouched, his hand heavy on the boy's shoulder. "You keep your sister close, and when I say hide, you hide. Understand?" The boy's chin trembled, but he nodded. There was steel forming in him already. Days passed in taut quiet. Dale worked harder than before, hauling wood, checking the fence lines, sharpening tools though the soil lay frozen. He taught the children simple things: how to listen for hoofbeats, how to tell when snow carried sound far, how to move quiet through the cabin if need came. They absorbed each lesson with wide eyes, too young for such knowledge, yet forced into it by the world's cruelty. The woman grew stronger, her steps steadier each day. She tried once more to insist she would leave, take her children into the wilderness rather than bring danger to his door. He only shook his head, voice steady. "You'll not walk out to die for a man like Briggs. I won't see it." His certainty brooked no argument. One evening, as the sun sank red over the snowbound hills, Dale took the children to the barn. He showed them his tools, let them touch the worn handles of the pitchfork, the smooth stock of the rifle. He knelt, carving a scrap of wood with his knife, shaping it slow and careful into the form of a small horse. He handed it to the boy, then whittled another for the girl. They turned the toys over in their hands, wonder softening their wary eyes. Laughter, thin but real, slipped from their lips. Their mother stood in the doorway, tears shining though she blinked them away. For the first time since her husband's death, she saw her children smile without fear pressing against it. But shadows lengthened. One morning, Dale found hoofprints again near the ridge, circling as though men had watched the cabin from a distance. He erased them with his own boots, but the truth was carved deep. They were being hunted. That night, the boy woke him, whispering, "I heard them. Outside. The ones who hurt Mama." His eyes were wide, his small body shaking. Dale listened, and in the faint hush between gusts of wind, he too heard it, the muffled sound of horses shifting in the dark. He stood at the window, staring into the night where shadows moved among the trees. His jaw tightened, breath steady. The storm was not over. It was only beginning. And as the woman stirred in her sleep, murmuring in some dream of past terror, Dale knew with a cold clarity, Briggs and his men would come. And when they did, this fragile family, this flicker of warmth carved from the wilderness, would face a reckoning no fire could hold at bay. Dale's jaw was set, his expression carved from stone. For days he had felt the presence on the ridges, the hoofbeats swallowed by wind, the prints in the snow too deliberate to belong to chance. He had faced storms, wolves, drought, but men like Calder Briggs were a different breed, relentless, cruel, and arrogant in their certainty that no law on this land would hold them accountable. And tonight, as the air pressed heavy with foreboding, Dale knew they would come. The children looked up when he stood, slinging the rifle across his shoulder. "Go to bed," he said quietly. His tone was not unkind, but it brooked no argument. The boy opened his mouth as though to protest, then saw something in Dale's eyes that stilled him. He pulled his sister under the quilt, clutching her close. Their mother lingered, rising to her feet with effort. "You cannot face them alone," she whispered. "I'll not have you in the crossfire." She touched his arm, the gesture trembling but fierce. "They'll take us if you fall." His gaze softened for the barest instant, then hardened again. "I won't fall." The first sound came then, faint yet distinct, hooves crunching in the snow, the jingle of tack muffled by the storm. The children stiffened under the quilt, and the woman's breath caught. Dale moved to the window, brushing aside the frost with his sleeve. Through the swirling white, he saw them. 4 riders, dark figures cutting through the storm. At their head, Calder Briggs, his broad frame hunched against the cold, a scarred face half hidden beneath his hat brim. Even blurred by snow, his presence radiated menace. They stopped within yards of the cabin. One lifted a lantern, its glow casting a sickly circle in the storm. Briggs called out, his voice booming, carried on the wind. "Holt! I know she's in there. The runaway and her little rats. Hand 'em over, and I'll be on my way. Won't be trouble for you." Dale opened the door, stepping into the snow. The storm clawed at him, flinging flakes against his face, but he stood tall, rifle cradled steady in his hands. His breath plumed white as he answered, "They're under my roof. You'll not have them." Briggs chuckled, the sound coarse. "You think you can stand against me? Against the company's claim?" "This land don't belong to your company," Dale said, his voice low but sharp as the bite of an axe. "Nor do they." Briggs leaned forward in the saddle, sneer twisting his mouth. "You're a fool, Holt. She's not worth dying for. Her kind never is." The insult landed in the snow between them, foul as blood spilled on clean ground. Dale's jaw tightened, but he did not move. "Turn back," he warned. Briggs's hand twitched, and the first shot cracked through the storm. Dale ducked aside, firing back, his rifle bark echoing in the night. Snow erupted around the horses' hooves. The twins shrieked inside, their voices muffled by the walls, and their mother pulled them tighter beneath the quilt. The riders scattered, circling, firing at the cabin. Bullets thudded into wood, splinters spraying. Dale moved with calm precision, reloading, firing, moving again. One rider toppled from his horse, clutching his arm, his cry swallowed by the storm. The others pressed harder, anger whipping them forward. Inside, the woman trembled, clutching the pistol Dale had left by the hearth. Her hand shook, but her eyes burned with determination. When a rider broke through the barn, kicking in the door with a crash, she rose. The twins screamed as the man's shadow loomed, but she lifted the pistol, firing into the rafters. The blast was deafening in the small space, the bullet tearing wood above his head. The horse spooked, rearing, and the rider cursed, retreating into the storm. The twins clung to her skirts, and though her arm shook, her heart pounded with a fierce pride she had not felt in months. Outside, Briggs dismounted, drawing a knife long and jagged. He stalked toward the cabin, eyes locked on Dale. Snow clung to his coat, his breath steaming, his fury palpable. Dale lowered the rifle, realizing the fight would not end with bullets alone. He stepped forward, boots sinking deep into drifts, the storm closing around them like a cage. They clashed with a violence born of survival. Briggs swung the knife, steel glinting in the lantern light, but Dale caught his wrist, twisting. They grappled, bodies slamming against the frozen earth, snow spraying. Briggs fought like a cornered wolf, snarling, spitting curses. Dale's strength was steady, deliberate, fueled not by rage but by the unyielding certainty that 3 lives depended on him standing. The knife grazed his arm, hot blood mingling with cold snow, but he did not falter. He drove Briggs back into the trees, away from the cabin. The blizzard howled, disorienting, but Dale pressed forward, fists striking, boots crunching. Briggs lunged, and for a heartbeat the knife flashed too close. Dale caught his arm, forced it down, and with a surge born of every hardship endured, he slammed Briggs against a pine trunk. The knife clattered into the snow. Briggs's breath came ragged, blood at his lip, eyes wild with hatred. "You'll regret this, Holt. You can't hide them forever. They don't belong." Dale cut him off with a blow that dropped him to his knees. Briggs slumped, groaning, the storm swallowing his curses. Dale stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping into the snow. He could end it there, but something in him refused to take a life unless forced. He turned, leaving Briggs to the storm's mercy. The land had a way of passing its own judgment. When Dale staggered back to the cabin, his arm bleeding, the lantern glow spilled out warm against the night. The children rushed to the doorway, their eyes wide with terror and relief. Their mother stood behind them, the pistol still in her hand, her face pale but fierce. When she saw him, her breath caught, and she set the weapon down, rushing forward to steady him as he crossed the threshold. He let her guide him to the chair by the fire. She tore cloth for bandages, her hands shaking, yet steady enough to bind the wound. The twins pressed close, their small hands clinging to his sleeve as though to anchor him in place. For the first time since he had carried them from the wrecked wagon, Dale let himself rest, his shoulders easing under the weight of their trust. The firelight softened the room. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, warmth held fast. The woman's eyes lifted to his, gratitude shining brighter than fear. "You saved us," she whispered, the words trembling but certain. Dale's gaze lingered on her, then on the children curled against him. His voice was low, rough with exhaustion, but unshakable in its truth. "No. We saved each other." The children nestled closer, the girl resting her head against his chest, the boy gripping his hand. The woman's touch lingered on his arm, gentle yet strong. In that moment, the storm outside was only noise. The true battle had been won within these walls, against fear, against despair, against the cruelty of men who believed they could own what was never theirs. Dawn came slowly, pale light spilling across the snow. Briggs and his men were gone, driven into the storm, scattered like shadows at sunrise. The cabin bore scars, holes in the shutters, splinters in the walls, but it still stood, stubborn against the wilderness. Dale rose, sore but steady, stepping to the window. He watched the snow glow stretching endless, the sky clearing to reveal a horizon sharp and clean. Behind him, the woman stirred the fire, the twins' laughter faint as they whispered to each other. He closed his eyes for a breath, feeling the truth settle deep. They were his now, and he was theirs. The land had taken many things from him, but it had given this in return. He turned back, meeting the woman's gaze. She held it, her lips trembling into the faintest smile, the kind born not of ease but of survival shared. For the first time since he had found them in the wreckage, there was no question in her eyes, no suspicion, no fear. Only the quiet beginning of trust. And in that silence, heavy with meaning, Dale Holt understood that the storm outside was only a shadow of the storm they had weathered within. Together, they had stood against it. Together, they would stand against whatever came next.